There we go. So our industry has driven us to a place where we think that we are competing with competitors with regards to marketing. And if you make your entire value proposition about marketing, you've lost before you walked in. Because the reality is there's no way to set one apart from a marketing perspective. I mean, what are we talking about? We're going to one up each other and say, no, I'm going to have a bigger billboard on 95. Well, I'm going to have a billboard on 95 and 84 about your property. At some point, right, what we do today, you can't work hard enough to not expose the property to the buyers who are going to buy it. Because the moment you put it on the MLS, it syndicates across the web and around the world. You can't stop it. You have to work to stop that. So what I would encourage you to do is to take a cue from a script that we wrote a good decade ago that nobody really uses anymore because this process kind of eliminates the need for it. And it's a script that talked about, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, can I tell you a secret? And when I was using it, I would ask that question and they'd say, sure. And I'd lean in and I'd lower my voice. And I'd say, so the secret that nobody in real estate really wants you to know is that we all do the same stuff. That's not, I'm not here because I'm better and take prettier pictures than the person at Sotheby's. That's not why you would hire me. As a matter of fact, the value proposition I offer is such that if you want to do this yourself and save yourself the money, the commission, I'll tell you. If you think that's why you hire a realtor, I'll tell you how to get it done. I'll give you all of the people that we use. I'll tell you who my photographer is. I'll tell you who we use to print all the fancy flyers. You may struggle getting on the MLS and syndicating to all the places that we do, but you could probably figure out how to do that too. That's not my value. My value is that I have expertise and skill in moving sellers from an accepted offer to the closing table. And the way we get you to accepted offer is I bring my skills as a local economist to help you interpret the current market conditions so that you can make the best decisions possible. Then we get you on the market, then the offer comes in, then we move you through to the closing table. That's what I'm good at. All the rest of it, you could hire anybody because we all do the same stuff. I think I took more listings with that script than almost anything else, because people were like, oh, look, someone who actually tells the truth. Because here's what they're thinking. If they saw 3 of you in a row, by the time they get to you and you're third, oh my goodness, keep sharp objects away from them because they're ready to end it off. Because they've heard the same thing over and over and over again. Because we all do the same stuff. So I would encourage you, don't make your value proposition about pretty pictures and fancy flyers. It has nothing, getting a home sold has nothing to do with that. Like I said, you have to work really hard not to expose a property to enough people that when positioned properly, buyers won't show up and offers won't come in. You have to go out of your way to work hard. Here's how I know that fancy flyers and pretty pictures don't sell houses. Because some of your colleagues, as a matter of fact, if you use Jeannie and Todd as an example, Jeannie and Todd sold $103 million worth of real estate last year. $103 million worth of real estate last year. They don't produce flyers for their listings. They just don't. They don't find it necessary. So they don't spend the money. They don't waste their time. And they take more listings than almost anybody in our company. Which means they take more listings than almost anybody in Fairfield County. Right? Here's another reason I know that fancy, pretty pictures don't sell houses. Because there are some agents who sell a whole lot of houses who don't do a very good job on the marketing side, and yet they still sell a whole bunch of houses. Right? So be careful that you're not basing your value proposition on a lie. Be careful you're not basing your value proposition on something that somebody sold you, or that the industry has decided that we all need to compete around, because we don't. This process, the things that you guys said in the first part of our conversation about why you loved this process, that's why you love this process, because you notice in it that we're not distracted by the fluff, that we're talking about real stuff that matters to real people in real time, and we're not talking about fluff. That's why so many of you are attracted to it. It's only those of us who have done it a different way, and trust me, because I've done it both ways, and the left-hand turn to this version was hard for me to make. However, once I did it, I never went back. I hope that's helpful. Marlene, go ahead.
I love what you said, local economist. I've never even thought of that as a concept to convey to a seller or a buyer, you know.
Yeah, I will give credit where credit is due. That comes directly from Gary Keller, right?
Oh.
That's not my phrase, that's Gary's phrase. And yet, when you think about it, that's why we get hired, because we understand what's happening in the local market. We are the local economist, and preferably we're the local economist of choice. Right? It's the whole conversation that we've been having over the course of the last few weeks about creating these equity analyses to deliver to your database. That's the whole point of that, because it underscores that that's what we do for a living. We are the local economists here to help you keep tabs on the rise and fall of the equity of your largest asset. Donna Gilbert.
And remember what Rick has explained to us is what the realtor's job is, what our job is to bring them the current information, help them interpret that so they can make the right decision. We're the keepers of the data. If they don't get it from us, God knows where they get it from. You know, I don't want them just picking it up anywhere. So it behooves us to make sure that they are well informed, which means we have to be well informed, right? And when we show up that way, they think of us not as the person who sends them the brownie recipe or remember to turn back your clocks and all that kind of stuff. When we show up with data points on a regular basis, they think of us that way.
You know, think about it from the perspective of other professions. If you went to a new doctor, and all the new doctor wanted to talk about was all the fancy new equipment in the office, and you're like, no, but I have pain like right here. That doesn't seem to me to be helping my pain right here. Can we maybe does that machine do anything to focus on the pain I'm having on my side? No, but look how fancy it is. And you know how much I paid for it? Oh my goodness, it was so expensive. It makes me one of the best doctors in all of Fairfield County because I have all these all this fancy equipment. It's the same conversation, right? You want to go in and say, what do you know that could be personal to me and help me solve a problem? And the doctor says, well, you know what, let me bring my personal experience and my expertise. I'm the local anatomist of choice, right? And so I'm going to bring my skill in your anatomy and my understanding about what can go wrong in your anatomy and help you solve a local problem, regardless of all the fancy equipment that's in my office. And maybe that's a dopey analogy, but I don't think so. I think it's kind of a relevant one, right? Versus sitting there having to listen about the fancy new equipment when you really don't care about the fancy equipment, because frankly, it's just your expectation that a good doctor is going to have up-to-date, interesting, and effective equipment. And to me, I wouldn't hesitate 1 second to say to a seller, again, here's the secret that no one wants you to know. We all do the same stuff. Please don't, please, I can encourage you not to utilize that as the criteria by which you choose a real estate agent. Because 9.5 times out of 10, you will be disappointed.
That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. James.
Yeah, so just kind of building on that, as someone who's never taken a listing before, I think for me, like the lack of skill is in figuring out how to do a CMA properly so I can price it properly to find a buyer quickly, right? Once it's priced properly, you're going to get buyers. But then obviously they have to go through the whole process of getting appraised and that appraisal coming in at a level where there's not enough of a gap to kind of collapse the deal either there. So to get it from the accepted offer to the closing table, obviously you have a lot of experience with that, and so do a lot of the agents I could probably speak to there that I could lean on. But I guess for me, like learning skills like the CMA and stuff, I'm in productivity coaching. They use the toolkit CMA thing, and that thing's just, I saw you had the CMA mastermind and we're talking about kind of how outdated that is. Do you have any good resources on kind of learning those skills a little bit better, maybe at a more general level, like using Smart MLS or something like that to pull that info and learning those skills? Obviously, we don't need to go too far into it here, but just for my own education after Ignite here might be helpful.
Yeah, so the quick answer is I do everything off of the MLS, everything. Even if I were using some other version of, when we move away from Toolkit CMA, which we are moving away from them to whatever we're going to, that doesn't eliminate the work that gets done on the MLS. The MLS is the repository of all things that you need to help understand market conditions. And you kind of start and end there. I'm going to put a period on the end of that sentence, James, for the moment. And when I'm back from family reunion, make sure that you plug into a class that we'll do on choosing the best comps. Again, there's a recorded class on it if you don't want to wait until I get back. However, when I get back, we'll do another class on choosing those best comps, and I'll show you how to work through what that looks like. Trust me when I tell you, it's not as difficult as you sometimes want to make it. It's actually a relatively simple process, and we'll just go through that, right? For the rest of it, I'm going to give you the anatomy of a seller transaction. So those of you who want to print that, go back to that. Oh, I don't think I have no, I don't. All right, let me get that. Link again. I always forget about that darn link. We're going to go through the anatomy of a seller transaction shortly. And what that will do is give you an outline of all the things that you need to be paying attention to make sure that even if you don't have experience in getting people from an accepted offer to the closing table, you have a checklist and you know what to do. And if you don't understand one of them, you can come back and say, hey, you know what? I don't understand that one. You could ask for help, but you know what to do based on the checklist that we're going to go through. Does that help?
It does, yeah, thanks. And I found the old recording here, so I was looking for CMA, not comps. So that's helpful as well. So I'll keep an eye out for the class when you do it as well. Thank you, appreciate it.
Sure thing. And you'll find that with me, you probably don't hear me say the term CMA much at all. So because I'm an SPA and or a market conditions guy. That's how I refer to what it is we do. The CMA to me is a kind of like toolkit. CMA is a tool of yesteryear. Okay, so here is the link to the power sessions. And so if you want to go ahead and access the anatomy of a seller transaction or print that out, you can grab it from that link. All right, so I am going to, any other questions or concerns about what we went through yesterday with the SPA? Going once, going twice. Okay, so the last thing I want to say
Rick.
about it is, yes.
Oh,
Real quickly, the SBA, now what I remember you made some comment about how to get a hold of or how to make those graph charts that we did in the red, blue, and green. What was that? I mean, how do we access that or create
Yes,
that?
that's on broker metrics.
Right,
Again,
yeah, the broker metrics graph.
right. And so if you need that sooner rather than later, you can go on YouTube. I've done classes on that. They're all recorded if you need to kind of access that more quickly. And I'll also be doing another class when I get back from family reunion on accessing broker metrics and how but you do need to come into the office for that, because it's not a tool that we can make available. It's a broker level tool, as it is if they knew that we were kind of allowing you to access it, we might have an issue. But
Sure.
so that's where you access that information.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure. Okay, so that being said, the last thing I want to mention about the listing consultation scripts is this. When the seller chooses their positioning, the only thing that's left to do is then sign the contract. So make sure that you've memorized PMGS so that once you have an agreement around a number, if you haven't already signed the contract, because it was one of the 3 in 10 sellers that you meet with when you ask up front if they want you to handle the sale of their home and they say yes. If it's the other 7, well, then you make sure that there's just that finalization, right? So it sounds like, is this a number that you are comfortable with based on the data that we've seen? Great. And I think you're making an excellent choice here. And the only thing left for us to do is sign the contract. So let's get that done. Right, and we move to signing the contract. It's a simple step because you've walked them through every step of the way. You've moved them through all of their questions. You've outlined something that is simple and easy to understand. You've involved them in the entire process. You've asked them their opinion. You've asked them to think about what the best path is. And now we just simply take the next step, which is finishing up and signing the contract. Are there objection handlers for price? Yes, of course there are. What I can encourage you to do, I know I keep sending you to YouTube on because we're in our last session here. However, there's been a ton of conversation that's recorded on YouTube around objection handling for price or objection handling for sellers. Right, so dive into that material if you want more on that. You were given some objection handlers in these scripts. My favorite objection handler, if someone is looking to kind of list too high, is that you just simply use the objection handler of, I understand, I'm curious, based on the data that we've just reviewed, what specific evidence can you point to that justifies that number? Right, knowing full well that you brought the data that supports a very different number, and there is no real data to support that, right? So you have to help people understand that we're basing this in fact. Right, Patricia said before this, what she loved about it was this is all just objective and it's based in fact. Yes, that is 100% true. However, sometimes you do have sellers' subjectivity to balance out in this conversation. Make sense? All right. So here's what's going to be fun. March, as we prepare for Bold, which is coming at the end of March. You all met our Bold coach the other day. I hope that you were excited about our Bold coach, because we certainly are. And so in preparation for Bold, most of March is going to be spent with in-person rehearsal sessions. So watch for the schedule around that. If you're curious as to, all right, how do I get better at this? How do I make sure that this flows? Well, you do it and you practice it. You practice it with each other. You practice it with me. You practice it in front of the room. You practice it and allow yourself to be recorded so that you can go and watch the recording back. Well, I think half of you just fell out of your chair. No, I'm going to tell you what, for those of you who have done it, having yourself recorded while you're going through the listing consult and watching it back is probably the most informative exercise that you can that you can do. Because you get to kind of watch and say, oh, I didn't know I was doing that. Oh, I didn't know I was like picking my ear or, doing weird things with my legs or, saying every 3 words or, or like, right? You pick up all these things. So watch for the ability to practice. We're going to practice you all out for in March. And I'm excited to get back to that weekly in person so that we can move you through any level of nerves around delivering any of this. Sound good? Sound like the logical next step? Cool beans. Oh, somebody just cut out. So somebody thought, no, not for me, I'm out. I'll have to go back and see who that was. All right, so let us dive into the anatomy of a seller transaction. We have exactly an hour and probably 10 minutes or so to go through this document, because I do want to save time at the end for any questions that you have, as well as give you your send-off with my cat house story. So, and trust me, for those of you who are struggling to get to 6 o'clock tonight, the cat house story is worth sticking around for. So the anatomy of a seller transaction, very similar to the anatomy of a buyer transaction, in that this is an outline for you to step-by-step kind of know what to do next and what not to forget, such that you can exercise those muscles in terms of creating that expertise and getting someone from an accepted offer to the closing table. So let's start at the top and go through this. Don't hesitate to stop me and ask questions if you have any questions. Number 1, you're going to receive an offer from the buyer's agent. The first thing you're going to do is check to be certain that all paperwork is included. And that included paperwork looks something like this. You need an offer, and you need an offer filled out correctly and signed by the buyers. I can't tell you over the course of the last 12 to 18 months how sloppy some of the offers that have come in to many of you as listing agents have been. I mean, it's like to the point of you want to say, all right, really? Sloppy, incomplete, unsigned, the math doesn't work, right? So as a listing agent, one of the first things you're going to do is receive that and make sure that A, you have all that you need, and B, that everything is signed and completed properly. You're going to do a review of what that looks like. So you'll need an offer. You'll need a copy of whatever earnest money they're putting down, right? The actual check doesn't necessarily come to you. However, a copy of that, or and then a letter from a lender qualifying them for the mortgage amount that's written on the offer. Did somebody actually say and write their name at the bottom and say, yes, these folks can obtain that mortgage? If they're paying cash, proof of funds. Right? Proof of funds can be a copy of a bank account, a copy of a stock account, a letter from a financial advisor or from their attorney outlining the funds that they have available to them. Proof of funds can show up in a number of different ways. And then, of course, you want signed disclosures. You want the property condition disclosure. You want the lead disclosure, dual agency if dual agency exists, short sale disclosure if it happens to be a short sale, and any other supporting documents like an inclusion exclusion form or the like. Yes, Carolyn.
I've had some agents tell me not to send them a copy of the check because it was multiple offers.
Yeah, Carolyn, I am so sorry, but it sounds like you're underwater. We can't quite understand what you're saying.
1 second, let me see if I can make that a little better.
Yes, that whatever you just did made it better. Oh, except
Can
now
you hear me?
yes, now you're good.
Okay, I said I've had listing agents tell me not to send them a copy of the check because of the multiple offers. And they said, just in case you're not chosen. So that's what I've been experiencing more.
Well, so I guess I have two thoughts. Again, you're not sending the actual check. You just want a copy of the check. I'm not sure why a listing agent would say, don't send me a copy of the check, because it's just a Xerox copy of the check so that we see that it was actually written. However, if they are saying that,
I'm thinking it's because since there's so many of them doing the, above list price or whatever, and that way the person doesn't have to keep voiding a check. That's the only thing I can think of.
oh, well, yeah. So what I would say is, generally speaking, follow the listing agent's instructions. If you expect to win the offer, right, follow their instructions. I think it's a weird thing not to ask for, and yet so be it. Well, welcome to 2022, right? So you're going to review all of those, all that data, all that paperwork, and make sure that everything is there. As a listing agent, if it's not there or it's incomplete, you get to call the buyer's agent back and say, hey, guess what? Unfortunately, this is not going to be able to be presented to the seller until X, Y, and Z is either signed or completed, or you provide this or that or the other thing, right? Understand that as a listing agent, you're in charge of all of that. Don't bring things that are incomplete to your seller, because the seller is going to ask questions around certain things. And if the offer is not signed, well, it's not real. If the math doesn't work, well, what do you really mean? How much are you really paying? What's the mortgage amount? You don't have a pre-approval letter or proof of funds. Well, how can we even consider your offer if we don't know how you're going to pay for it? Right? So all of these things have to just be reviewed and made sure that you have a complete package, and don't be afraid to professionally ask for revisions to be made if they need to be made. Number two, note, a verbal phone call stating that someone is bringing you an offer is not an offer. Please note, you have an offer when you actually receive it, when someone hands you pieces of paper or you receive a PDF in your email. Because here's what happens. I call Donna and say, hey, guess what, Donna? I'm bringing you an offer on 123 Main Street. And Donna gets really excited and says, okay, that sounds great. You'll have it later today? Yeah, I think so. Great. And she picks up the phone and she calls her seller and says, I just heard that we're getting an offer. I'm so excited. I think we're going to have it later tonight. Well, did you hear all the conditional language? Well, the seller doesn't hear any of those conditional words. The seller hears, we're getting an offer. And then guess what happens? 4 o'clock comes, no offer. 5 o'clock comes, no offer. Dinner comes and goes. Now it's 7:30. There's no offer. And now you're like, Donna's calling me. Hey, Rick, I just wanted to check in with you. You know why she's calling me? Because the seller is texting her like crazy. Where's this offer? You said we were getting an offer. What's going on? Like, we didn't go out to dinner tonight because we thought we were going to be talking to you on the phone about it. Makes everyone look foolish, right? So when you have an offer, let people know you have an offer, but you don't have an offer until you actually have it in hand and it's complete. Number three, if dual agency exists, of course, the first step is to get consent from everybody about the dual agency, right? The buyer's agent has the buyer consent. That form gets sent to the listing agent. The listing agent has the seller consent. Then somebody gets that document to me and I consent on behalf of the brokerage, and then the games can begin. Then the offer can be sent and pursued, right? Now, understand that if you are not a member of my market centers, that process may be different in your brokerage. Check with your broker to make sure that you understand the process in your brokerage. In my brokerages, the process is buyer's agent has the buyer sign it. It gets sent to the listing agent. The listing agent gets consent from the seller. Then somebody gets it to me. I consent on behalf of the market center. And then the offer gets presented and you negotiate. Number four, once you have verified that all the paperwork has been received, you call the seller and inform them of the receipt of the offer. If possible, arrange a time to meet, either in person or via Zoom, to review the offer, right? If that's not possible and you have to do it over the phone, then so be it. However, I like in person or on Zoom because you have face-to-face, you have body language, you have facial cues, you have all that stuff that you miss on the phone. You're then going to review the offer with the seller. Now, before we talk about reviewing the offer, just note, if the offer comes in now at 4:39 and you're meeting at 7 o'clock, I would encourage you, don't just push forward on your computer with that email with the PDF of it all at 4:39. Don't forward it to the seller and have the seller sit with it for 3 hours before you actually are on the phone or on Zoom reviewing it with them. Send it 5 or 10 minutes beforehand so they have an opportunity to at least know it's there or print it if they so choose, and then you're on the phone with them. You don't want them to have time with this thing without you there to help interpret it. Make sense? So number 5, review the offer with the seller. Now, the rest of this may sound stupid. However, I'm going to read it slowly. Do this in an upbeat and encouraging manner, no matter what price or terms are included in the offer. I'll read that again. Do this, review the offer, in an upbeat and encouraging manner, no matter what the price or terms of the offer are. Remember, someone liked their home enough to want to buy it, and the seller's not required to accept any offer that's not acceptable to them. I want you to understand that this is massively important because it sets the tone for how you will have a conversation around offers with your seller. And what I find is that when people aren't excited about an offer, guess what? Sellers aren't excited about an offer. When an agent is not excited about an offer, the seller's not excited. When an agent has something derogatory to say about an offer, or worse, someone bringing the offer, or the agent representing the person bringing the offer, guess what? Then the seller feels the same way about those issues. You set the stage there. You want people to be excited about offers? Be excited about the offer yourself and communicate in an upbeat and positive manner. Why do we have to talk about that? Why do you think that people don't naturally do that? What are they attempting to do when they don't show up in a positive and upbeat manner in delivering offer information? No thoughts?
They might just start questioning the process and why they're doing it, or just like, is this going to work out? And starting to question you potentially instead of looking at it as a positive process, regardless.
Yeah, I mean that's on the seller side, absolutely. What else, Anna?
Confidence.
Well, yeah, there's a great answer, right? So
But she said-
if agents are lacking confidence, they'll find a way to make the issue the offer instead of their own lack of confidence, right? It masks lots of different things. You want to show up confidently and be excited about every single offer, because here's the thing. Typically, the offer that they have in hand is better than the one they didn't have yesterday. Now, I know things are moving crazy, and everyone expects 15 offers. Guys, I'm going to tell you what, that's not going to last forever. It may not even last through the spring as we begin to normalize with more and more inventory. So don't think that's the norm. So number 6, the review should be done from top to bottom, hitting the highlights. I'm going to read through a quick example of how you can outline or review an offer with a seller. Pay close attention. And I'm going to ask you some questions on this at the end. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this offer is from Tom and Sally Smith from Pennsylvania. They have 2 kids and another one on the way. They both will be working down in White Plains once they make their move. They are opening negotiations on your home with an offer of $550,000. They will look to finance 80% of that with a mortgage, and we have a letter of pre-qualification from Westport Mortgage for that amount. Their ability to obtain this mortgage will be a contingency in the contract. The other 20% will be in cash, 10% total at contract signing, and the other 10% brought to the closing table. They've asked for the following extra items to be included in the sale at that 550 number: the pool equipment, the lower level freezer, and the play set in the backyard. Their contract will be contingent upon satisfactory inspections of the house and septic systems, which will also include testing the well water and also testing for radon in both the air and the water. They're asking for 7 days to get those inspections completed. They'll have contracts signed and back to you within 14 days, and they've requested a June 30th closing date. So let's discuss. Do you have any questions on this offer? What are your thoughts? So that's just a manner in which you can deliver that information. Now, for some of you who have only known real estate for the past 6 months or so, you're thinking inspections in 7 days, contracts in 14 days. Like, what world are you living in? Well, I'm living in a more normalized market world, right? Those are typically the numbers that we're working with. Right now, everything is massively accelerated just based on market conditions. So what did you hear? What did you like? What didn't you like? What did you notice? What were your ahas in that delivery? Yeah, James.
I like how, it kind of takes a top-down approach where first it's like, this is who they are. Then this is what they're actually offering and how that offer is structured financially. And then you get into kind of the more specific details about it. It's just very structured and organized. One thing though, I was just wondering about, like, you as the realtor saying that they have 2 kids and another on the way. Is that like a fair housing issue potentially there at all? Just because, family status is one of the areas where that could become an issue. If they said, oh, they have kids, I don't want it, or something like that. I don't really know how that kind of falls into there, but just a thought I had as I was reading it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I will give you my answer to that question. My answer to that question is, if the buyer's agent has provided information about their sellers, I am going to deliver that information because it's in the cover letter, right? The only reason I'm reading it out loud is because I have passed that along to the seller and it's in the cover letter. And so could it be a fair housing issue if the sellers chose specifically to turn down that offer because those people had children? Sure. That could be a fair housing issue. However, it is not necessarily a fair housing violation to simply communicate information that the buyers have offered about themselves. There's nothing illegal about telling people that you have 2 kids. What could be problematic is if the sellers chose to use that information to make a decision. Now, I can tell you as a listing agent, I do everything I can possibly do to help people understand that it doesn't matter who's moving into your house. Irrelevant. You want the best price and terms for your asset, right? We're going to look at this from a business perspective. We're going to look at this objectively. So does that answer your question, James?
It does. Yeah. I mean, it's good to know that I can relay that information without creating any kind of real issue. I imagine, like, what would my role though be if they decided to specifically turn it down? And maybe that's a question for a different day.
It's definitely a question for a different day, just because we have time constraints.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are answers to it. We will get to a lot of that in our risk reduction sessions that will show up in about a month. So if we don't get to it before then, you'll hear more specific objection handling and solution paths for fair housing issues or potential fair housing issues when we do our risk reduction sessions in March.
Cool. Yeah, I know it's probably a non-issue, a fringe issue. So let's keep moving. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else on what you heard? Yes, Patricia.
I like on that how it was very clear, the timing was very clearly spelled out, 7 days, 14 days, etc., closing date that they were asking for. And I also liked how they were clear, at least what the contingencies were that they did not want to move on, i.e. they had to have a mortgage contingency, they had to have an inspection contingency. But I also liked that there were some openings there for the seller, or at least I thought I heard some of, they'd like to have the pool equipment included, the opening price is $550 or that sort of thing. So I felt like there was some nice delineation there of like what the musts were and where there was also some possible room to move.
Yeah, well said. Well said, right? Because the whole idea of communicating things in this manner is to, far too many agents call and say, hey, Donna, I have an offer for you. It's $550 and if they'd like to close in June. What are your thoughts? Like what? And Donna's like, well, okay, can you give me any more information? Right? Because the agent thinks the price and the closing date are the only two important pieces of information. The whole process that I just walked you through, gives them all the information. It checks all the boxes, it fills in all the holes so that they can make a more comprehensive decision about how to move forward. I also love that Patricia noticed that we have a conversation that says negotiations on your home are starting at $550,000. That's different when you say the offer is $550, because a lot of times sellers hear $550, period. Versus their opening negotiations at $550 says you get to be in control, right? You get to make a decision about whether that works for you or not. You get to accept, reject, or modify. We're back to ARM all over again. Anything else that you heard that you want to make sure that we talk about? Going once? Going twice? Okay, moving on. Number 7, be certain that you examine every line of the offer. You want to be sure to point out any items such as contractual language or anything that later may come as a surprise to the seller up front. The whole purpose of number 7 is to make sure that you actually read the document that the offer comes in on. Because you need to know what it says. You may not be in a position to offer legal advice if the seller starts asking you about certain clauses or what are the constraints about this? How legally does this affect me, right? You're not the attorney. However, you need to be able to point to certain things like, okay, so if you sign this, it's a binding contract. Versus if you sign this, it says right here, this is not a contract, and so it may not be binding upon you, right? You have to be able to point out certain things, which means you have to read it. So number 7 really should say, just read what comes in so that you're aware, so you can make the seller aware. Number 8, work with the seller such that they fully understand that the offer, that's being presented. Answer any questions, counsel them on next steps. If the offer is acceptable, they may accept. If the offer is not acceptable, counsel that creating some sort of a counter, right? The modify in ARM, accept, reject, modify. So the counter would be a modification, is the next reasonable step. Right? It is my opinion that no counter from a seller is it's not good business practice. Right? The seller came to the park, asked you to bring your glove, they brought their glove and the baseball. If they throw you the baseball and you just take it and go home, well, guess what? You're no longer having a catch. And that was the whole idea of meeting in the park with our gloves. So be careful. That I'd rather a seller come back and say, you know what, we're going to counter at $1,000 off of our asking price. Now, again, these are conversations that maybe aren't being had right today with the market moving as swiftly. However, we need to learn how to be listing agents in both a fast moving market and a more normalized market. Right? And in a more normalized market, counter offers are more the norm than they are today. Number 9, you may want to call the name on the mortgage pre-qualification letter and ask some questions about the buyer. Let me ask this question. As a listing agent, can you call the buyer's mortgage person and ask questions? Oh, there are a lot of very vigorous heads nodding up and down. Yeah, of course you can. That's why they provide that information. So my thought is, if you don't know the person, if you haven't worked with the person whose name is at the bottom of the letter, it might make sense to call and just verify that they've actually spoken with these people. right? That this wasn't written by their Aunt Gertrude or wasn't done on their own printer, right? Maybe that sounds a little paranoid, and yet, again, you're making representations to the seller about the offer that that has come in. Doing a little digging can't hurt. Number 10. Yes, Jorge.
Yes, so you can ask if about the likelihood of them getting the loan or not. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying you can certainly ask. If you were calling me and I was the mortgage person, I wouldn't be answering most of those questions, right? And yet you can certainly call and ask and see who you get on the other end of the phone. Some people will tell you the damnedest things.
Okay, all right.
Right? Minimally, Jorge, what the real reason for a number 9 is to make sure that if you're unfamiliar with the name at the bottom of a pre-approval letter, I think it's worth a telephone call just to make sure, even if it's from the perspective of, look, your borrowers are making an offer on a listing that I represent, and I just wanted to call and introduce myself, make sure that you didn't have any questions about the property, and I wondered if Tom and Maria Smith, just verifying that you actually provided this document for Tom and Maria Smith. Right? It can be as simple as that. You could ask more questions if you so chose, if you were looking for more info. Just know that the mortgage person likely isn't going to give you much more information than that. At least they shouldn't be.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Number 10, once the offer is negotiated and acceptable to both parties, you're going to have the document rewritten if there were changes that were made, and everyone's going to sign it. Again, the signing, as it's noted here, says within 24 hours. I would encourage you, especially in a fast-moving market, that you shorten that to, instead of 24 hours, make that 2 to 4 hours, right? You should be getting something signed back relatively immediately. If someone's interested in, once you say yes on the listing side to a buyer's agent, you need to have that document resubmitted and get everyone's signature as quickly as possible. Let's face it, nowadays, everyone has DocuSign available on their phone. There really isn't a reason why we need to spend hours and hours and hours getting signatures. It needs to happen fast. Time is no one's friend in a real estate transaction. You want to keep things moving swiftly. Number 11, you're going to ask the agent for the buyer a couple of things. A, who the buyer's attorney is going to be, who the buyers will be using for their inspector for the house, who the buyers will be using to inspect the septic system, if that's relevant. And if the buyer plans on making application with the same mortgage company that the pre-approval was written on. Right, so just questions that you need to be asking as the listing agent so you can gather enough data so that you know what your next steps are. It also indicates whether or not the buyer's agent is on top of things. If you need to keep this moving, and the buyer's agent says, oh, you know what, no, they don't know anyone that we're going to use. Okay, well, time's a ticking, my dear. When do we think we might know that? Right? You need to help encourage people to be moving these things along. Taking 3 days to make phone calls to interview attorneys after the sellers have accepted an offer, that doesn't cut it. That doesn't cut it in any market. It certainly doesn't cut it in today's market. Number 12, once you have all the information, you're going to prepare a package and make sure that everybody gets a package. It's all the documentation. You want to make sure that the seller's attorney has all the documents to be able to either utilize what was signed as the contract, if in fact they received a contract, or the seller's attorney is going to rewrite and write a new an attorney-based contract to be able to get that off to the buyer's attorney as quickly as possible. So they need to have all the supporting documentation ASAP to put that plan in motion. Number 13, give a copy of all the paperwork to your MCA. So you're going to get to Lisa or to Sam within 3 days of the fully executed document, all of the paperwork for that documentation. You can get it to them directly via uploading it into Command and submitting it submitting your documentation and then submitting a commission on the transaction, or you can utilize our concierge services, where you can submit that to the market center, and the market center will take care of getting that information into command for you and delivered to the MCAs. Number 14, once the inspection dates are set, be certain that you inform the seller. I can tell you that the reason that's there is I made a mistake one day and got a phone call at about 8:30 or 8:40 in the morning from a seller. Hi, Rick. Hi, how are you? Well, that depends. Oh, well, what does it depend on? Well, it depends on the answer to my next question. Are we supposed to have an inspection today? Oops. Yeah, we scheduled an inspection at the seller's house for 9 o'clock. People got
It's
there.
5 o'clock.
Oh, well, thank you. People got there early. She was in her pajamas with her kids, feeding them breakfast, unprepared for an inspection, right? Because I forgot to tell the seller that we had scheduled that inspection. So that's why that's on there, because when you're dealing with one transaction at a time, it's way easier to keep things clear. The second you start to scale and you go to 2 or 3 or 7 or 15 transactions at a time, if you don't have a checklist, if you don't have a system to follow, it's just impossible to keep it all in your head and not have it backfire on you. The good news is she forgave me. We redirected the inspector to start on the outside, which gave her about 45 minutes to finish feeding her children and get everyone dressed and out the door. So disaster averted. However, it was embarrassing for me. So that's why number 14 exists there. The rest of 14, also, if there's anything that's a special that the seller has to do, like airing out the property prior to the inspection for radon, or sealing up the house a certain number of days before for radon, right? Be sure that you're having those discussions ahead of time so that no one is surprised by that time frame. Marlene.
Just going back to the 3 days to get that package to the market center.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that package the one that includes the lawyer's contract or the original offer contract? Because sometimes
Yeah,
when
just the offer documentation. If you have attorney document, we oftentimes don't even get the attorney contracts, right?
Okay.
So yeah, that's all offer documentation. Sometimes the contract is written, the offer is written on a contract form, and so sometimes you have that available, but that has nothing to do with the anything that the attorney is going to provide. Great
Right.
question.
Those attorneys, once they get involved, sometimes take their time.
They certainly can. They certainly can. Yeah. So 3 days is we need all the documentation that you have in those 3 days so that we know the transaction exists. The issue there is, so people oftentimes say to me, well, why do you even need that until it's closing? Well, we need it because A, we're responsible for the transaction because we're the brokerage. B, once the transaction begins, if you think that they don't call the market center and ask questions about certain things, the attorneys call the market center for information. Sometimes the other agency calls the market center, right? People are calling us, and if we don't even know the transaction exists, it makes everyone look a little foolish, right? So do make sure that plus we have to invoice for the transaction. If we don't know the transaction exists, well, we're not invoicing in time. So it just kind of mucks up the whole works. Number 15, report the property as under agreement, which today in the MLS is under contract, continue to show, right? And that you report it that way if in fact the seller is interested in continuing to show the property for backup offers. If the seller is uninterested in showing the property for backup offers, you move it to under contract. Those are the two different forms of under contract. There's under contract, continue to show, and under contract. Some people are still using those the way we used to use CTS and pending in the old days. So here's what it's not. It's not, you don't go to UC CTS, under contracts continue to show, prior to an attorney contract being signed, and only go to under contract after an attorney contract is signed. That's not, those are not the uses of those codes anymore in our MLS. For those of us who have been around a while, that's how it used to be. Now it's a matter of, does the seller want to show for additional offers or not? If they do, it's UC CTS. If they don't, it's UC immediately. Please note that this says 48 hours. That has changed since this was written. The MLS rules are 24 hours. You have 24 hours to report a change in the MLS, regardless of who says otherwise, including your seller. 24 hours, you have to report any change in the MLS. Yes, Jane.
Hi, Rick. Zillow, I guess you're aware, and many people are, they're now putting on the site when a house goes CTS, accepting backup offers. And you know, the list agents look upon that with chagrin. And you know, how can I handle that when I have a buyer who wants to look at a property that went CTS 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that it's what it says on Zillow, you know? Did you know that?
Well, yes, I do know that. And
I hate that.
The solution to that is to just use under contract, because Zillow does have a responsibility to utilize the codes the way they're written in our MLS. And so when you're putting it in our MLS, UC CTS, they will then publish accepting backup offers, right?
Oh.
If in fact you go to UC, they should not.
They can't.
That should not be listed that way anymore. So that's why I made the distinction there, right?
Yes.
There's definitely two uses of those two codes. So use them the way
Correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Jedna, in the chat, I'm putting a link to a Google Drive. The anatomy of the seller transaction document lives on that Google Drive, so you can grab it right from there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Number 16, stop by the inspection to check in and see if there's any information that you can provide. Best not to hang around. As a listing agent, you don't belong at the inspection. The inspection is an opportunity for the buyer and the buyer's representatives to experience the property without interference from the sellers or the seller's representatives, right? I encourage, if it fits in your schedule, for you to drop by just to see how things are going. Or if it does not fit into your schedule, because again, at scale, when you have one listing, you may have an opportunity to do that. When you have 23, scale brings a different version of that. And so then it's just knowing inspections are happening and making a quick outbound phone call to the buyer's agent midway through. Hey, how are things going? Any questions? Anything I can help with? Right? It's just a check-in and a moment to see if you can assist, and then you'll move on. Number 17. At this point, you will need to keep all parties in action, right? Because after the inspection is done, oftentimes there's a little bit of sorry, I'm not quite there yet. You'll need to keep all parties in action. Set a schedule for yourself to be in constant contact, which means at least every few days, with your own sellers, with the buyer's agent to see how things are moving along, with the seller's attorney to see how things are moving along. You may want to be asking questions of the buyer's agent. Hey, have the buyers made application for their mortgage yet? Hey, what's going on with the appraisal? Hey, any issues with the inspection that we need to be talking about, right? Follow up. That's different than being a pest. Follow up is, hey, just making sure that you don't need any assistance. Hey, just making sure that I can't answer any questions. Minimally, the buyer's agent, the sellers, and the seller's attorney, you're going to be talking with them every couple of days during this time period. Number 18, once the inspections are done, you can expect to hear from the buyer's agent regarding any items that may need to be addressed, right? Set expectations with the buyer's agent about when you will hear from them. And if they do not call you, please proactively call them. Don't make the mistake that a lot of listing agents make in that, well, I haven't heard anything from the buyer's agent, so no news must be good news. No. If nothing's going to be asked for at the inspection, I want to hear that directly from the buyer's agent, and I'd like you to actually put that in writing so I can put that in my file, right? A simple email will suffice saying, thank you, the inspections yielded no issues. We're moving forward with the contract. Great. But I want to hear that. And then I want to see it in writing. Number 19, keep tabs on the mortgage. Has the client made formal application, right? Has the appraisal been scheduled, right? These are the questions that you're asking of the buyer's agent. However, they're on your checklist to make sure that you are aware that these things have to be followed up with. Number 20, inform the sellers when the appraisal is going to take place. That's another issue that I had, a different seller where the appraisal was scheduled and I forgot to tell the seller that the appraiser was coming. Now, she wasn't home at the time, but she was still upset because she didn't know the appraiser was coming, which means she didn't tidy up the house before she went to work. And she was upset because she thought that that was going to reflect poorly on her value, right? Plus, all sellers have a right to know when someone's going to be in their home. It was a mistake on my part. Again, it's why it shows up on your checklist, because as I mentioned to you a number of weeks ago, I have done everything wrong at least once. And so my hope is that by documenting all of my failures, you get to have transactions that are far smoother. I had to learn by falling on my face a whole bunch of times, right? This hopefully saves you from falling on your face too many times. Number 21, check in with the seller's attorney, ensure that you know that contracts are either signed or are going to be signed, right? The seller's attorney should be able to say to you, yes, I sent a new contract out on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday, so they should be signing on Thursday, and I'll have that back Thursday night, right? Keep everybody pointing forward. Do you remember on the buyer side, the conversation that we had that at some point it starts to feel like your job is to make sure everybody else is doing their job? Well, the reason it feels that way is because just like on the buyer's agent side, when you're on the listing agent side, you have the same responsibility. Your job is to make sure that everything is going smoothly, that all the plates continue to spin, that everyone is doing what they're supposed to do. That's part of the skill and expertise that you bring to the table to ensure that things go from accepted offer to an actual closing table. When sellers hire agents who don't bring that skill to the table, that's when accepted offers, whew, we sold the house. Oh, no. Accepted offer means my job just begins. My job isn't over with the accepted offer. We're just getting started, right? Two different ways to look at that. Number 20 something, 23. Negotiate any inspection items through to the satisfaction of both parties. Right, we're not going to spend too much time on this because we spend a lot of time on it on the buyer side, which is why the seller side goes more quickly, because we spent a lot of these things are just you're wearing a different hat. The important thing to remember is the expectation that you're setting with the seller. Are you setting expectations when you're negotiating transactions with sellers to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it is always my advice. I encourage each seller that I represent to at least mentally carve out about $3,000 for any issues that may come up at inspections, any unanticipated issues that may come up at inspections. If you choose to negotiate differently to get to an accepted offer, keeping that $3,000 in the back of your mind, that's why I'm telling you now. Right? But we need to set expectations with sellers that likely they'll need to spend around $3,000 to handle inspection items that come up. Yes, I know we're in a moment in history where there's no contingencies and I'm not doing anything. I get all of that. However, even in today's market, that is not always the case. And even if it's outlined as the case, it's not always how things play out. I still believe encouraging, setting expectations with sellers that something could come back at them from the inspections helps you save transactions from falling through because of inspection items. Here's what's awesome. When nothing comes through, or when some small little issue comes through, it's only going to cost the seller $100 or $200, you look like the hero because you had them negotiate knowing that they could have to spend up to $3,000. Here's the other side of that. When something comes back and says, you know what, we've got a roofing issue that needs to be addressed. Okay, well, let's get a roofer out there and see what that might cost. Well, it's a $5,000 roofing issue. Okay, well, here's the good news. The good news is you had already, at least mentally, set aside $3,000 to handle additional issues. What are your thoughts, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? Are you willing to give that $3,000 that you had mentally set aside as a credit? Are you willing to increase that amount and get the work done and just handle the $5,000? Right? Which path do you want to go down? You've already set aside the $3,000 in your mind. So minimally, it seems pretty easy to offer that as a credit. All we're talking about, guys, is setting proper expectations. And when you set proper expectations, not just on the buyer's side about inspections, but on the seller side as well, regardless of how fast the market is moving, you help create safety nets underneath your transactions. Do you see how that works? I don't know why I said the word works twice. So you can certainly answer yes, yes, if you see how that works. Okay, it's not even Friday and it's not even 5 o'clock. All righty. Number 24, check in with the buyer's mortgage again. Know the contingency date and whether or not the buyers will meet that. Stay in contact with the seller's attorney and the buyer's agent on this. Right, again, you want your finger in all of these things. One of the days that I will never forget in my entire real estate career is after Debbie and I merged our businesses together. We also we merged our offices together, and so we used to sit next to each other in an office. And one day I was listening to her on the phone, and she was asking clearly she was talking about one of our listings, and she was asking all of these questions of the buyer's agent, including some of the questions that you just saw on your list here. How's the buyer's mortgage, right? Did the appraisal come back yet? What, we have about 2 more weeks till the contingency date. I'm curious, do you think we'll meet that? Asking all of these questions. And she hung up, and I don't know if she remembers this day, but she hung up, and I kind of turned to her and said, like, what was that? She said, what was what? I said, what were all those questions? And she said, well, I was talking to the buyer's agent on 123 Main Street to make sure that the mortgage was moving ahead. Now, understand that I had already been in business by myself for 4 years or so when Debbie and I merged our businesses together. So it wasn't like I was brand new at this. I had my own successful business. I looked at her like, I thought, you know what? I've never once done that as a listing agent. I've never made phone calls to the buyer's agent checking in the way I'm outlining this for you to check in. And I think she must have thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? I think I've hitched my wagon to a moron, right? But the idea of making those phone calls, it never occurred to me. So I say that to you because that was like an aha moment for me. The light bulb went off saying, wow, you know what? As a listing agent, I need to be far more involved in these transactions than I had been previously to make sure that that safety net was stitched really, really tightly. Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, I actually thought, what a boob, but other than that, no, the point about what Rick just said was Rick's story before about you're learning these things from him because he made that mistake. He heard me talking to those people because I had made that mistake before as well. We learn from our mistakes. And here's the benefit that you guys get and the value that you guys get. You get to learn from our mistakes, so you don't have to make those mistakes. Build them into your systems, build all these things into your systems now, so you don't come up empty. We talk about, I was talking to another agent today who's struggling with mortgage issues, and they haven't asked enough questions. You've got to ask questions along the way so you don't trip yourself up at the 11th hour. And there are circumstances where you can't possibly ask enough questions. There aren't enough questions to be asked because the situation's difficult. And yet this will save you 95% of the time.
Well said. Well said. And thanks for sticking in there with me. Thanks for believing that I wasn't as stupid as I sounded. Number 25. Number 25, I want you to put a star next to. And I know it sounds dorky. However, it's likely one of the most important numbers on this entire sheet. And number 25 says, encourage the sellers to begin packing. Trust me, you can't encourage that early enough in the transaction. You may want to do that the day you list the property, right? Pack up all the closets, pack up the basement. You might as well just have everything kind of neat and tidy. However, it shows up here at number 25 once the sellers know that there really is a transaction and it's moving forward, because my experience tells me that most sellers massively underestimate the amount of time it's going to take them to pack up and get rid of the crap in their house, right? Even if someone has not lived there for 20 or 30 years, between the basement and the garage and the attic, they're just like spots that we stick stuff that we forget about. And then all of a sudden, I can't tell you how many times the day of closing, I arrived with buyers at a walkthrough, or I got panicked phone calls from sellers saying, we're not out. We just don't know where this stuff is coming from. We ran out of boxes. We don't know what to do with it. We don't have a dumpster here anymore. We can't throw it out. What should we do? Right? So encourage that process to begin as early as you can. And then assist through it. Talk with, if you're looking for something to, I just mentioned, you need to be having conversations with your sellers every few days. Well, that's a check-in every few days. Hey, how's the packing going? Hey, how's the packing going? Hey, how's the packing going? Hey, I know I asked you this 3 times in the last 7 days. However, I'm curious, how's the packing going, right? And then if they run into issues with boxes, you can maybe be a resource for that, right? Direct them to make sure that they're moving themselves forward. Number 26, once you've signed a contract and agreement to all inspection items and a mortgage that's cruising along, you may fall into a period of time where not much is occurring. Right? This is that kind of 30-day pending no man's land in a transaction, right? You've been literally on the phone with everybody day in and day out for weeks on end, getting to an offer, then getting from the offer to this point. And then all of a sudden, there comes a time in a transaction where it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot to do. And so I put this in here because I want you to be really clear. This is what will make or break the relationship with your sellers. If you remember, we talked about it on the buyer side as well. The relationship with your clients and your ability to receive referrals post-closing. Because how you handle this 30-day kind of no man's land period sends the message. It sends one of 2 messages. It either sends the message that I am only interested in you when it has to do with getting paid, or it sends the message, I am interested in you from start to finish. I am invested in you. I care about what's going on in your world, and I'm going to make sure that I maintain a level of communication that proves that. Those are the 2 messages that you will send, depending on how you handle this 30-day period of time. And so what I'd like for you to do is make sure that you're in contact with your sellers minimally every 48 to 72 hours. Every 2 to 3 days, you need to be having a conversation, just checking in. Hey, how's it going? You can use the packing thing, right? If you skip down to number 29, I've given you a list of things that you could use in that period of time. You could make a call and make sure that they remember to put a transfer order in for utilities. You can call them to arrange an oil tank reading. What's an oil tank reading? What does a seller have to do to arrange an oil tank reading?
Oh,
Go ahead, Brett.
no, I don't know what they, I
Oh,
would
okay.
imagine, I'm sorry, I would imagine they would call their oil company, but then they get a credit for the oil, the buyers get a credit for the oil that's remaining. Is that right? Or did I mix that?
It is 100% right. See,
Yeah.
you know exactly what you're talking about. So yes, the buyers will buy the oil in the tank. And so the sellers need to arrange with their oil company, someone to come and stick the tank to see how much oil is actually in it, so that that reading can get passed on to the attorneys, and the attorneys can make that adjustment at the closing, right?
Rick, also you can take if you're an agent, happen to be there, you can take a picture of the reading and send it to the lawyers too.
You could. That doesn't relieve the requirement of having an oil company come out and stick the tank.
Okay, well, that's what I learned from someone. So
Sometimes those gauges don't work. I would not rely on it. No.
Yeah.
The gauges have
No,
false
no.
readings. Don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody can attest to that better than me, because as Debbie knows.
Right.
Anyway, I didn't run out, but it was, I actually think I had more in my tank than I thought I did. So yeah, the gauge is not reliable.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me that. I'll destroy that thought.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, Diane and everybody, it's the idea that don't take on yourself the job that belongs to the seller, right? I know we think that's a good idea sometimes because I'm being helpful or I'm giving good customer service. There are some things that are simply not your job, and that's one of them. That, to me, that is a seller's responsibility. It's our responsibility to remind them to do it. It's our responsibility to follow up to make sure it was done. It's our responsibility to maybe check in with the attorney to make sure they've received the right documentation. But the actual doing of that, we're going to remove ourselves from. I put that in the category of vetting tenants for a landlord, right? It's the same kind of thing. That's not our job. Our job is to get the information and then deliver it to the landlord so the landlord can review the information, ask questions if they have to ask questions, and then make a decision. We're not vetting those tenants. When we step into those things, it puts us in a position of potential jeopardy, right? There's exposure there, and it could cause closing delays if in fact the buyers show up and say, so wait a minute, so there's no oil tank, like a professional didn't come out and actually tell us how much oil is in there. Why would I want to take anybody's word for it? Right? So just be careful about those kinds of things. That's a shortcut that I'm glad you mentioned it, Diane, because it's a shortcut that allows us to discuss the larger picture of there are certain things that just fall outside of the scope of what you need to be handling or what you're licensed to assist with. And that's one of them.
Yeah, I just heard it from productivity coaching. But anyway, I'll tell Jen.
Yeah, no, and yeah, let's be cautious about shortcuts, right? No matter where you're hearing them, be cautious about shortcuts. D, take care of change of address, their change of address, right? So again, these are all just ideas for you to be able to have a conversation with them around. Number 27, keep the market center and your MCA in the loop if closing dates change. We need to know when the closing date actually is, right? Because we invoice it with a certain system. And so if the closing date is going to be moved up and it's 2 weeks or so earlier than what you told us, well, the invoice may not go out in time, and that causes issues with the attorney's process in the closing. So make sure that we know if the closing date is moving. Please update us as often as possible, and that goes directly to either Sam or Lisa to make sure that they have accurate information in our system. Number 30, check in as daily as the closing day approaches. Find out if the sellers need assistance in any way, meeting the deadline to be packed and out of the house. Number 31, perhaps send lunch to the seller's house on the main move out day. I'm going to tell you what, Debbie, are you still doing that? Sending lunch on move out day?
100%. It's absolutely always a winner. I mean, it's when you talk about creating an experience, I don't do a lot of fancy things that are cute and fun. That daggone lunch provides a huge purpose for the seller, and they are blown away by it. And I go to Genoa Deli. What I have done is adjusted the sandwiches, but I take sandwiches, chips, and brownies usually, and drinks, and feed their movers as well as anybody else who's helping them. And it costs $50. Sometimes it costs $90 if they have a ton of people helping them. It is awesome. I've had people who called the second day and said, "Are you bringing us lunch again today?" No, I take it once. I do take it once, but that's a winner. I wouldn't ever stop doing that.
Yeah, from my experiences with that, we got more credit for sending lunch on move out day than any closing gift or any, that's the thing they remember, right? So it's a great way to kind of solidify your relationship right at the end there, as people are, remember, everyone's dirty and there's no food in the fridge, the plates are all packed, right? And so finding that food for the kids or for everybody, and then feeding the movers so they don't leave your property, that's a stroke of brilliance.
There's a hospitality thing about, you always want to start with an impressive appetizer, and you always want to leave with an impressive dessert. The dessert's the last course is the most important, and that's the last course.
Yeah, indeed. That is definitely the dessert at the end of the meal. Number 32, remove the lockbox from the house, order the sign down, take out your marketing materials, right? You want to make sure that you're coordinating with the buyer's agent as you're doing those things, because the buyer's agent will need a key to get into the house to do the walkthrough, right? So you may want to leave the lockbox on until the walkthrough is done, and then you're gathering all that stuff, you're calling your sign down, you're doing all the end of listing agent stuff. Number 34 hardly happens at all anymore, so it dates this document a smidge, like we talked about on the buyer side, and that is go to the closing with the seller. More often than not, you're hearing from the sellers and or their attorney that they have signed the papers, right? The sellers are oftentimes signing prior to the day of the closing, and then the actual closing day is with the buyers and their mortgage paperwork. However, utilize that closing date to ask for a testimonial, right? That nowadays, I love the video testimonials. I love sending people to Google or the like to write reviews, right? I love the idea of sending out a reminder to have them go and do the reviews. I love sending out a survey of, how'd we do? Any and all of those things all are happening right in and around the closing day. One of the best times to ask for testimonials, video or otherwise, is the day that they're smiling because they just got handed a check for $327,000, right? So you might as well capitalize on that and have some marketing tools created for you that day. Of course, you're then going to report the property is sold in the MLS within 24 hours of closing day. You're going to follow up with the seller 24 hours after the closing just to check in. You're going to send a closing gift if that's part of your plan. You're then going to follow up with the seller 1 week after the closing just to check in. Again, if this is sounding familiar on the buyer side, it's because it's the same process. You're going to place your sellers on a post-close follow-up system, even if they're moving to California, right? You want to be certain that you're placing them on some kind of a follow-up system, either your 12 direct via email or a 36 touch program, because if they lived here for 15 years and now they're moving to San Diego, and you stay in touch with them, what could come of that communication, that ongoing communication with them?
Referrals for friends and family.
Referrals.
You got it. Referrals for the people that still live here, right? So don't lose touch with them, stay in contact. And then of course, number 41, go and list another one. Questions, comments, concerns on the anatomy of a seller transaction. I know we went through it quickly. However, my hope is that because we spent so much time on the buyer side, you're recalling some of those conversations. It's a very similar process on the listing side. James, what do you got for me?
Just kind of going back towards the beginning, in a market like this, obviously in like a buyer balance market, it wouldn't be as overwhelming, but in a market like this, how are sellers agents handling multiple offers right now? Like, are they collecting them all at once? Is that something you communicate with the seller up front, what they want to know? If they want to go through every single one as they come in, or at the end of the day, you go through them, or you wait until after the first weekend it's up to go through all the offers. And then you put them in a table or something usually to kind of walk through all the different options that they have.
Yeah, great question. So with multiple offers, it's a conversation you will have with your sellers during the listing process, right? So after you've listed the property, one of the expectation setting conversations that you will have is, so Mr. and Mrs. Seller, with regards to receiving multiple offers, what are your thoughts on the best path for that? Here are your options, right? Be thinking about what your options might be. You could decide, so with today's market, the way things are moving, a lot of listing agents and sellers are deciding that, and notice I said listing agents and sellers are deciding, not listing agents deciding, right? This is always a conversation with your seller. They're deciding that we're going to put it on the market on a Wednesday night. We're going to show it Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We're going to collect all the offers on Sunday night. We'll get together and we'll outline, we'll review all the offers. Right, that's a popular path forward in today's market. However, in a market that's moving either as fast as it is today or more slowly, there are other opportunities. A seller could decide that they are interested in working with the first offer. Some sellers feel very strongly like these people were first. Let's have them come up to where we want them to come up. Let's make their offer sing the way we want it to sing, and we'll hold everybody else in backup. You can counter one offer. You can counter all the offers. You can utilize technology to help sort through all of these offers by sending people to a Google sheet that you use as a portal to input the information, and then it kind of populates on a spreadsheet, and you can work with the sellers based on that spreadsheet. You can go and sit in their house and kind of look at them all on paper. You can do it via Zoom. There isn't one answer to that question, James. And I'm not really sure that there's, this may come out differently than I mean it to. I'm not sure there's necessarily a best practice. I think the best practice in and of itself has to do with each seller. There may be a best practice for how each seller chooses to move forward. And then once they've made the choice, the best practice, of course, is always to keep everything clear, everything moving, be highly communicative. You want to make sure everyone is feeling like they're treated fairly. Go ahead, Debbie, what else?
It always depends on what the seller wants. And I would say always make sure that they know what their options are in order to be sure they've gotten the best possible price, if the best possible price is what's important to them. I always have that conversation with them. If you left money on the table, would you be unhappy? Because we have a system to make sure you're not leaving money on the table, but convenience may be more important to you than maximizing your return. Most people are going to say they don't want to leave money on the table, but there are some people who just want to get it done. So for what that's worth.
So the conversation again reverts back to what's most important to the seller, right? It's driven by the seller, always and forever, always driven by the seller. And which is kind of what I meant when I said the seller has to decide, and then there are best practices based on what the seller decides. Once the seller chooses a path forward, there are best practices to make sure that path forward goes smoothly and everyone feels like they have been treated fairly. There's not necessarily, though, a right or wrong answer from a seller about how to address or deal with multiple offers. Does that make sense, or did I just confuse you?
No, it does make sense. It's about having that conversation up front and then organizing it based on how they want to move forward. So
Yeah, it's yet another answer of that answer actually is handled in the expectation setting conversation, right? You don't have to spend too much time working your way through it in the heat of the offers coming in if you've proactively set the foundation for how we're going to handle that, right? Just makes it makes everything move more smoothly. Anna.
Nick, how you handle if, for example, your seller is very like high D, very decisive, but he's like, okay, I'm here is my like power of attorney. This is that I'm leaving for 3 weeks in Europe, and you decide, Anna. I know you will do good job. You decide. And then you have all those offers, and kind of like Sherry said, oh, I don't know, whatever you choose, fine. How you will handle that? And he doesn't want to be bothered with offers, and how you keep communicating in that scenario.
Yeah, so remember that script I gave you? That is outside of the scope of what I'm licensed to assist you with. Well, that's a perfect opportunity to utilize that script. You know what? Thank you so much for your trust in me. However, that decision-making is actually outside of the scope of what I'm licensed to assist you with. What I can suggest, Mr. Seller, is if you are unable to be involved in that process personally, and you nominate your attorney, and your attorney is willing to make those decisions, then I'm happy to have the conversation directly with your attorney. I'll need you to put that in writing with me, and I'm certain your attorney will need to have some document established with you as well. And then we can do that. I mean, if that's the seller's wish that the attorney just make the call, then we'll work with the attorney. However, you are unable to accept that responsibility, regardless of what the seller says or how hard they push. It's outside of the scope of what you're ultimately licensed to assist them with, because you can't make those decisions. Does that help?
Thank you, Rick. Yes.
Sure thing. Diane.
Yeah, I was just wondering, as an agent, do you advise on, like, if there's several offers and, you know, all things being equal, they all have mortgage contingency and so forth and so on. Is there a type of mortgage that, like, for instance, conventional versus FHA versus CHFA? I mean, do you guide them towards the solidity of the loan, or you just look at like other, you know, like the whole picture, like how much they put down, or?
So for me as a listing agent, no, I don't know that I would start giving personal opinions about loan products. So if the seller has questions, oh, I see this one is an FHA loan, we can certainly grab one of our mortgage partners and have them explain the differences between the loans to them.
Well, that's what I meant.
And the idea of grabbing a mortgage partner to explain the different loans to them if they ask, ultimately will come down to them the seller understanding that if the buyer is pre-qualified or pre-approved for a certain loan product, there's not one or the other that's going to necessarily be better or worse, right? It's just because someone's going FHA doesn't make them a less qualified buyer, is the point I'm looking to make, right? And having the mortgage partner explain that to them if they ask is the way I would handle that. I would not offer a personal opinion, even if you have one. To me, it's not the place for it. Go with one of our partners who has an expertise in all of that, and any partners will tell you or tell the seller, look, if they're pre-approved, then they're pre-approved. They're pre-approved for that loan program. Here are the pros, here are the cons, here are the ups, here are the downs. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Excellent. Anything else? All right, guys, it is 5:43. We have 17 minutes. We can end relatively safely with my cat house story if you're interested in hearing it. If you're not interested in hearing it, we can certainly answer questions about real estate for the next 17 minutes as well. What's the vote? I know some of you have heard it before.
Story.
Okay.
Cat house.
Looks like we're going for the cat house story. All right. So this is one of those, Debbie said before, Rick has pretty much failed at everything, which is why he gets to, that's at least what I heard her say. Rick is the most prolific failure that I have had the pleasure of knowing. Right. And this is just another one of those stories where my hope in telling you is that, is it an entertaining story? Well, sure. Some find it entertaining, some find it horrifying, and some find it sort of someplace in between. The reality of why I tell you this story is to make sure that you understand that in what we do for a living, sometimes you just can't make stuff up. And sometimes you are put in positions that you have to make decisions. This is an example of maybe not the best decision, although it does have a happy ending. So my cat house story begins way back in likely about the year 2000 or 1999. I was doing some prospecting around some neighborhoods in Southern Ridgefield, and I found a seller who positively responded to some form of outreach that I had sent out. Either I can't remember if I was calling or mailing or calling behind a mailing or something like that, and said, could you please come over and look at my property? I said, sure. Well, we set up an appointment, and the night before I did my call to confirm the appointment. Yes, I did it myself back in those days. And I got no answer. And I left a message, and I got a call back the next day, a message canceling the appointment. Well, that happened 3 different times. And so I finally said to this guy, look, do you want to sell your house or not? Are there issues that you're struggling with that force you to keep canceling the appointment? And he said, well, the issue that I'm struggling with is that I don't know that I can really have you come into the house. And I said, all right, well, tell me a little bit about that. He said, well, it's kind of a mess. And I said, you know what, look, I'm just coming there to look at the bones of the property. Don't worry about that. Okay, so we set the appointment. He keeps this appointment. I show up at the house. It's this little ranch, kind of all overgrown and a little bit nasty, down on Silverbrook Road. I think this is where this was. And so I park my car and I do my whole thing, right? Because when I park at the street, I go out, I take some pictures, I walk on either side, I walk around the outside, I'm doing my looking. I walk up to the front door and I knock on the front door. And there's like a screen door, but there's no screen or glass in where that goes, so it's open. So I just kind of knock on the wooden front door. And I wait and no one comes. And so I knock a little bit louder. And as I'm knocking that second time, the front door flies open. And there's this short little guy with no shirt on, screaming with words I won't use to tell this story. Who the fuck are you? What the do you want? Screaming at me. And I said, okay, so hi, I'm Rick. I'm the realtor, and are you Dave? No, I'm not Dave. Boom, and he slams the door shut in my face. I thought, okay, well, this is going well. So I knock again, and this time a different person who does have a shirt on opens the door and says, so I'm sorry, are you Rick? Yes, I'm Rick. He said, I'm so sorry. That's one of my roommates. That's, whatever his name is. Crazy man. Sorry about that. Sure, no problem. And I go to open the screen door, and he starts to step out, and says, you know, maybe we could start to have our conversation on the patio. And I said, you know what, again, I'm only here to see the bones of the house. I have some thoughts about how we may be able to find you a buyer without really having an issue about showings. So why don't you just give me the tour? He says, okay, that's fine. So we step into the house. I step in to the front door and he closes the front door behind me. Cue. And as the door closes behind me and the last little sliver of light shines through the little crack as the front door comes to a close, I suddenly find myself in a completely pitch black house. And so I'm standing there. I can feel that this person is in front of me. I'm standing there in the dark, kind of wondering, okay, well, what are we doing next? And my eyes are starting to adjust and trying to find, and he says, oh, you know what, I'm so sorry, but you know, the light over here is broken. I have to go across the room to go and turn a light on. So why don't you just follow me? Follow you? I can't see anything, right? And so as I'm standing there, I'm trying to get my bearings. I'm trying to see something. There's living room windows with blinds pulled, but in the side of each of the blinds, like a little sliver of light. And so my eyes are starting to adjust and I'm starting to see kind of where the walls are and some furniture and whatnot. All the while, completely overcome by the most horrendous odor you could ever possibly imagine. So I'm having a conversation. I'm trying to be cool. I'm trying to be professional. I'm also trying not to gag and puke at the same time, right? And so I'm doing a whole lot of this, like with my hand up to my nose and thinking, well, I can't be rude by doing that because he can't even see me because there's no lights on in the house. And so as my eyes are adjusting to the dim light, I'm kind of watching him move from the front foyer area across the living room to the other side of the house. And he's kind of walking like this, like he's like walking as if he's afraid to step in things. And I'm thinking, okay, what is that about? Does he just walk weird? Is there something on the floor? Well, as I start to follow him, he gets to the area across the house by the dining room area and turns a light on. And as he turns a light on, a number of things happen all at once. You know how things like start to go in slow motion? Well, that's what started to happen to me. The first thing I noticed was that the reason we were going like this across the floor is because there were all these little puddles across the floor. Thinking, okay, what, like, is the roof leaking? What is going on here? Well, no, the roof wasn't leaking, because the other thing that started to occur to me as the lights came on and I'm adapting to what's really happening here is that there were more cats in this house than I have ever seen in my entire life before or since. There must have been 100 or more cats in this house. There were cats on the ground. There were cats on the furniture. There were cats on the windowsill. There were cats on the shelves. There were cats in the fireplace. There were just cats everywhere. So the whole house now seems to be moving because everyone's just kind of doing that cat thing. And oh my stars. So I'm walking across the living room to kind of follow this guy. And I'm writing my notes down, like hardwood floors. Like, okay, what are you writing down? Like, who cares if there's hardwood floors, right? And yet, again, it's habit. I'm there for the walkthrough. So I'm taking all of my notes. I'm holding my nose so that I don't throw up. I'm trying to be polite. I'm trying not to step in any of the puddles. I'm trying not to let the cats touch me, right? So I get across the living room and he's now in the dining room. He's turning on another light so that we can see more of what's happening in this whole fun house. And so as he turns the light on in the dining room, again, more cats and there's just cats everywhere. I can't even describe to you. It was like the floor was constantly moving and their furniture was constantly moving because there were just living things on every surface. So we get into the dining room area and he says, oh, you know what, I'm so sorry. He pushes all these cats off of one of the chairs. It's like, you know, why don't you sit down? I can get you something to drink. I'm like, oh, no, that truly, that is more than fine. You know what? I am good standing. I had some water in the car. I thought to myself, something to drink, sit down. Are you kidding me? No, thank you. Not while I'm conscious, at least. Right. And so he says, well, you know, what's next? I'm like, well, you know, why don't you give me the rest of the tour? And I'm following, I'm taking my notes. We walk into the kitchen. There's a sink full of cats on dirty dishes. There's cabinetry that doesn't have actual doors on it anymore. And so there's cats on the clean plates. There's just cats on the refrigerator. Everything is just stinky and catty and nasty and horrible. So we walk through the kitchen, down now back to the other side of the house. It was like kind of a square, right? I came in here, went across the living room, into the dining room, across through the kitchen, and now we're back over on this side. And the first thing here, before we turn down the hallway where the bedrooms are, is the bathroom. And so he opens the bathroom door. We very quickly shut that bathroom door. That was one of the more horrific moments in this experience, because the bathroom was, well, there were cats in the bathroom, just PS. Not using the toilet, I will say, but they were certainly everywhere. There were cats in the tub, and it was all nasty and black and gross and horrible. So we make the turn, we go down the hallway. He opens the first door for the knocks and opens the first door, and this mass of smoke comes billowing out of the first bedroom, like to the point where I couldn't see him anymore. Like, oh my God. And so now I'm trying not to puke. I'm trying not to choke on the smoke that's come pouring, just billowing like the room was on fire. And he's doing, the guy's doing this. He's like, oh, well, you know, this is bedroom number 1. And as the smoke starts to clear, you can see there's some guy who kind of looked like Santa Claus sitting in the corner watching television, chain smoking. I think he had 2 cigarettes in each hand, right? He would smoke one, smoke the other. I mean, hey, how you doing? Like, oh, I am just spectacular. Thank you so much. Oh, in a closet. Okay, great. We'll just not note that down. Thank you very much. We can close this door. We go to the next room and he opens it and he said, well, this is my bedroom. Smoke was not billowing way out. However, every square inch of that bedroom was covered in newspapers. There were newspapers, like, did you ever see an episode of Hoarders, right? That's what this guy's bedroom looked like. There was one little path from the door to a little spot on the bed that you could sit down. I don't know how he slept on the bed because there were newspapers on the bed, under the bed, all over, everywhere. Newspapers. Okay, great. We close that door. We go to bedroom number 3. We open it. The shirtless, yelling, screaming, nasty man is there, who starts yelling all over again. What are you doing in here? What the f wrong with you? Why don't leave me alone? Screaming at the top of his head. Okay, great. That's enough of that. Sorry, my roommate's a little bit of, yes, we met earlier. Thank you very much. Right. So we're now back to the front door. And I thought to myself, okay, this is probably where we should end this tour. And so the guy says to me, is there anything else you need to see? And this is where I don't come off all that great in this story. Because at that moment, looking backwards, I should have said, nope, I think we're set. Why don't we go outside? I'll give you a call. And I didn't. I followed my process. I followed my script. And I said, well, the only thing I really do need to see are the mechanicals in the basement. So could you show me the basement? So he says, oh, sure. We have to just go through the kitchen. So here we go again. We're going back through the living room. And so we're walking across through the puddles and the cats are all doing their cat thing. And we get into the kitchen and he opens the door to the basement. Now, this is like, you have to cue like the psycho music, like neat, 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 right? So picture this. He's in back of me because we kind of walked in this way. He said, oh, the basement's here. So I turn, he reaches around me and opens the door to the basement this way. The door doesn't open into the kitchen. It opens over the stairs. So he's behind me. I'm standing at the top of the stairs. It's the perfect setup for, I mean, did you ever see Misery? Like when Kathy Bates pushes the guy down the stairs, right? Well, it was the perfect setup for that. That's not what happened, however. And this is where the story takes a bit of a horrifying turn. So just buckle in. So he reaches around me again and he flips the light on. And did you ever either see a movie or if you ever lived in the city, right? And even if you weren't a slob, sometimes, you know, you saw a roach, right? And you know when you flick the light on someplace and like a bug scatters? Well, he flipped the light on. And again, I'm standing at the top of the stairs looking into the pitch black. He flipped the light on and I could swear that what I saw scurry at the bottom of the stairs was a small child. And so now I'm kind of, now I'm okay, how do I write that in my notes? Like what exactly is going on here? So down the stairs we go. We get to the bottom of the stairs and there's all these 2x4s as if they tried to like build another room, and some of it has sheetrock on it and some of it does not. And so he says, oh, well, there's no real door. You have to squeeze through. That's, we didn't put the sheetrock in those 2x4s. So you have to just squeeze through the 2x4s to get into that room. Like, oh, okay. So, you know, duh. So I squeeze through the 2x4s and I get into the room, and sure enough, over in the corner is this little girl. I don't know, maybe she was 3 or so. And sitting over in this corner is who I assume was her mother, sitting in a chair, stirring some pasta in a little, like a little hot plate. Why they were sitting down there in the dark is beyond me. I mean, maybe there was some light from the basement windows, but it looked pretty dark to me when he flipped the light on. And so I said, I turned to him and he said, oh, well, yeah, these are my other tenants. Oh, okay. Tenants in the basement. Okay, well, that's good to know. So he said, oh, so I make a note of that. He says, all right, well, let's just, the mechanicals are around here. So we go across the little room. I say hello to whoever's cooking the pasta, and we squeeze through the 2x4s one more time. And now we're like in a back mechanicals room. It's dark all over again. He goes to turn the light on. The light doesn't turn on. So he goes out of there and turns another light on in that other room. So now there's kind of light coming this way. And as the light's coming into this now darkened room, and I'm noticing what's all over. Did you ever see the movie Alien with the eggs? Right? And at some point when the eggs sense that there's a human, they open, right? And then out comes the thing. Well, I'm standing there and I'm looking around thinking, okay, it looks like there's a whole bunch of alien eggs across this basement floor. Now, I'm thinking they can't be real alien eggs because I'm pretty sure that was a science fiction movie. I don't think that was based in any fact. And yet that's exactly what they look like. So what could this be? So he says to me, well, the mechanicals are across the room. Did you want to go and check them out? And now I'm starting to think, all right, why are you down here? Like, what exactly are you doing? And so, but the curiosity was killing me. So I took a step or two closer and kind of looked. Well, they weren't alien eggs. They were large bags of cat litter. And just beyond, and there was probably 8 or 10 of them, large bags of cat litter open at the top. And beyond that was like a large plastic kiddie pool. So apparently, at least at some point, the cats would come down the stairs and utilize that kiddie pool with the cat litter in it. And then, you know, if you've ever had a cat, you scoop the stuff out of the cat litter and you put it someplace. Well, where they chose to put it was in all those bags. But then they didn't take the bags out. They just left them there with their tenant and this small child living just next door. do you need to see anything else? No, I think I am all set. And so I said my goodbyes. I said goodbye to the tenants. We walked back upstairs and we walked back across the living room and finally got back outside, only to say to him, look, it's clear to me that we're going to have issues showing this property, right? I think like the biggest understatement ever made, ever in real estate. We're going to have some issues showing this property. Let me go back and do some work and I'll give you a call about how we're going to handle getting this property on the market. And I got back in my car and I took a really deep breath and I drove with the windows open all the way back down to my office. What's the moral of the story? Well, let me tell you the end of the story, and then we can go with the moral of the story. The end of the story is I listed that property and I listed it for $265,000. And we listed it from the perspective of you can't see it. It's a tear down. So you can drive past it and look at the land. I sold it to a builder. So I got both sides of it. The builder built $1.3 million or so house on it, right? And the guy that I was speaking to who gave me the tour and the Santa Claus roommate, not the crazy screaming shirtless guy, but the Santa Claus roommate, they actually asked me once we sold that house to go and sell them a house in Danbury. So think of all the different pieces of business that came from that small little experience. Now, would I have done things the same way today? No, I wouldn't, right? I would have recognized that some of the decisions that I made back then were kind of foolish, right? From a safety perspective. Would I have done things differently in terms of listing the property and finding the builder? No, I would have done all of that exactly the same. I just would have taken a little bit more precaution in terms of getting through the walkthrough. But here's the moral of the story. I never met a house I didn't like, right? Now, if I can say that about that house, right? Because real estate is real estate is real estate. And at the end of the day, those people needed someone's help, right? They might have needed a whole lot more help than I am qualified to give, right? If you kind of look at big picture. However, from a real estate perspective, they needed someone to come and guide them through the process of disposing of that property. They couldn't live there anymore. They couldn't afford it. And they needed someone to help them find someplace else to live. And I did that too. And in the interim, got a whole bunch more out of it that almost wasn't expected. So don't underestimate the power of what it is you do. Don't be as foolish as I was and put yourself through that process, right? You could kind of step in and say, oh, it's very dark in here. You know what? I think I have all I need. Let's go out on the porch, right? You could have done a quick turnaround and had that conversation out on the porch. You didn't have to go through what I went through. However, the real moral for me is be careful about the judgment that you bring, because at the end of the day, people need your help. And even the crazy people need your help. And even the people who are hoarding and have 9 jillion cats and they need help. And so at the end of the day, I showed up with a plan to help them move things forward. And everybody won. Everybody won. Guys, that is my cat house story. It probably took 5 or 6 more minutes than I expected. It did. But I hope that at least gives you something to chew on until either the next time we have this opportunity to discuss it, if you come back to Ignite, or the next time you're in a scenario where you think, this kind of sucks, but it's not as bad as Rick's cat house story. I wanted to give you some perspective, you see, for your future. Hey, this has been a whole lot of fun for me. I hope that it has been fun for you. I hope that you've taken away lots from our time together. My biggest hope, however, is that you're using this information and turning it into opportunity, because that's what this is about. It's about taking time to learn stuff and then going and implementing on the tail end. find buyers, find sellers, list those properties, list those buyers, find them. Have to use these tools that we talked about because you are diving right in and writing business. Guys, we are off to family reunion tomorrow, so we will see you next week. I encourage you, if you have not purchased a virtual family reunion ticket, you still have an opportunity to do that. You don't want to miss the information. You just don't. And come into the market centers on Monday and Tuesday morning to see the live streams. We will see you. I'll be around for a little bit tomorrow. We'll see you again live and in person on Wednesday of next week. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon. Good night.
Thank you, Rick.
Have a good trip.
Thank you. Have fun in Florida.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.